we have a wonderful storyteller named Rita Hill. Rita is an organizer with the Irish Bikoza, which is a socialist feminist movement. She has fought to put the reality of abortion happening on the agenda by using the abortion pill in protest of pushing for the referendum to be held. So all the way from Ireland, Rita Hill.
Thank you so much to everyone from the Women Project and everyone who's come along, but also to the collective, which is a feminist bookstore 40 minutes south of here, who invited me to speak, and I'm speaking at a few other events during the week, so if you can't get enough, feel free to come along to some of the others. A lot of people, when we won the referendum in May in Ireland, said no one could have predicted this. This is a landslide, no one could have anticipated this. Not to toot my own horn or that of my organisation, but we were quite confident. We saw the battle as a battle against the political establishment who did not want to hold a referendum, to get them to hold a referendum. That's the fight, that was the main battle for us. We had a lot of experience that actually, when presented with the reality, which is that life is very complicated and difficult situations arise, the vast majority of people have great sympathy for someone who needs an abortion. And even if they might have moral questions about it and be worried about it, they wouldn't want to send that person to prison rather than allow them to have that abortion. And Laura mentioned some of the research that was done, obviously, up to the referendum. And one of the best pieces of research, in my opinion, is a poll run by the polling company Red Sea and commissioned by Amnesty International in February 2016. And I think we talked about language already, but the way that you pose questions and the way that you frame things makes a huge difference for people. Do you agree with abortion? Is a bit of a misleading question. For me, for you, for someone in X situation, for someone in Y situation, it's actually all very different. And one of the questions, and it was put to people, do you agree with this statement or do you disagree with it, was, do you believe we need to trust women when they say they need an abortion? And 68% of people said yes. 70% of people in Dublin said yes, and in the south region in the south, which would include Cork, which is another, well, they're not big by American standards, but city. And then in one of the more rural regions around Galway, 64% of people said yes. So while there's a bit of an urban-rural divide, it's not as if, oh, it's only Dublin got this over the line or anything like it. So that's not far off 66.4%, which is the number that we actually won the referendum by. So while you cannot take it easy on the basis of what polls say, I think we should be given hope and encouragement by the positive numbers that sometimes do show up in polls, and they can show up in polling stations and on the streets and show out for the cause when it's needed and when it's very clear to people we've got to do this for ourselves. I think that's what mobilises your base, though that can be confusing. So my personal story is not the most common version of the Irish abortion story. As Laura said, we have about 10 people a day. It's about 9.5 people a day, but that's not real. So about 4,000 people give Irish addresses in British abortion clinics every year. Some more people would go to Belgium and other places in Europe, and particularly, say, immigrants. If you're from Spain or something, you'll probably go home to Spain to have your abortion. And likewise, if you're from Canada or something like that, you might go home in order to have your abortion. It might be covered by your insurance and things like that. But that's not my experience. When I found out that I was pregnant just before my 23rd birthday, I couldn't afford the around €800 that it would cost me if I walked into a clinic in England. I couldn't afford last-minute flights. And I needed a different solution. I was lucky in that I was already involved in the pro-choice movement, so I had access to information that not everyone would have. So I knew about a service called Women on Web, Women on Web is an amazing, incredible service run by pro-choice doctors and activists who assist people in countries where abortion is illegal. They send the pills mifepristone and misoprostol through the post for people to use in early pregnancy to have a safe medical abortion at home. They send them to countries in the Middle East, they send them to parts of Latin America. Unfortunately, for the last few years, there's been extreme difficulty in getting the pills into Brazil, which is quite devastating for women on web activists because the emails and the stories from Brazil are extremely heartbreaking. They send the pills to some parts of Europe, including Poland, Ireland, the Isle of Man, Malta, and now they're beginning to assist some people in contexts where, in fact, abortion is technically legal, but as we know, a law on paper and a service in your community are sometimes very different things, and it's not really accessible for people. So I knew about the service, I knew that people who I'd met had used it, I knew it was safe, and I did a huge amount of research. I read basically every word on their website. And I read the words of the WHO, the World Health Organization, over and over again, that these are essential medicines, that these are life-saving medicines, and that for me, it was absolutely the best option, but it was difficult for different reasons. Laura mentioned the parliamentary committee that was kind of part of the process, and I would say, in fact, one of the many things that the political establishment came up with as a kind of delay tactic, because they're not thrilled about where we are now. They're not super happy with the fact that they have to bring in an abortion law in the next few months, and it wouldn't have been what most of them wanted. But in that committee, in my organisation and other organisations called for emails to be sent. Emails, not a big deal. Not some intrusive campaign. Emails to be sent to the representatives, the members of parliament and the senators on that committee, asking them to continue and to support what the Citizens' Assembly had recommended, which was basically choice up to 12 weeks of pregnancy, and then later pregnancy in the second trimester for socioeconomic reasons, for survivors of sexual assault, and in all stages of pregnancy for risk to the health or life of the pregnant person, for there to be no differentiation between mental health and physical health, and for abortion in cases of severe fetal anomaly. So some of the politicians who got those emails weren't thrilled, and they had the cheek to say something that I just found particularly offensive, that it was an administrative nightmare to get so many emails. And I completely understand that if you're talking about the issue of abortion, you're certainly going to get some unpleasant contact from the other side, and that is difficult, and no one should have to accept being spoken to like that. But I don't accept that it's an administrative nightmare for politicians to get emails from their constituents who need an abortion or may need it in the future about an essential aspect of their health, and the laws that are currently in place that say you could go to prison for 14 years. A real administrative nightmare was when I was waiting for my pills to get through customs. I wasn't able to have my pills posted to the south of Ireland where I live because customs seizes every single package because they know what the packages look like. So I had to have mine sent to a friend in Belfast, which is legally a different country, where abortion is also illegal and is still going to be illegal after the new legislation is brought in the south. That was extremely difficult to organise that. It meant I had to tell that friend about the situation. I'm glad I did. I had her support, but it really put me in a particularly vulnerable position when I was waiting for what are medicines that will put the power back into your own hands, that will allow you to take control of a situation that is extremely difficult. To have to wait for that is very, very difficult. I was in a fairly good situation because I had all the information, and when I received the pills, the whole process became my complete focus for a couple of days. A medical abortion, many people opt for a surgical abortion and increasing numbers opt for medical abortions. Medical abortion can take a couple of days. So I took my first pill on one day, felt no different, was able to go about my day. On the second day, you're taking the pills that cause cramping, and I expected pain, and it was painful. I expected bleeding, and I bled. It was extremely reassuring to have the detailed medical information about what was happening to me, to have it in a non-condescending or exclusive manner explained in a way that I felt in control of the situation. But the reality is that I knew I had the list of possible side effects that are a problem and that would require follow-up medical care. They're very unusual. I didn't require follow-up medical care, but I knew that if I did, I would have to lie. I wouldn't be able to go into the emergency room, go into the hospital and say, I used these pills, because I could possibly go to prison for 14 years. I felt fairly confident that I could lie, but it wasn't the best worry to have when you're going through a medical procedure that, while it's one of the safest medical interventions in the world, it's one of the most common medical interventions in the world, and I'm sure lots of people here have personal experiences, and it'd be great if people want to share their own stories in a few minutes. It's also not pleasant. None of us have an aim of needing an abortion. So it was unfortunate and unlucky that I happened to need an abortion 5 years ago and not, in 5 years' time when abortion will be legal and available in the country where I live. I've told my story, not a huge amount to be honest. I've never spoken at a meeting like this about it really, and I wish I had told it more. I wish I had talked about it more. I wish I told more of my friends and family at the time when it was happening, because it turns out they're all extremely supportive, which I knew they were, like, theoretically, but actually when it would come down to me, for some reason I was nervous about it. I wish that I'd talked about it more, because for a long time we've been told, not by women or women's organisations, but by the media, that a certain type of abortion story is okay. It's okay if your health was in danger. It's okay if it was a fetal anomaly. And obviously it is okay. And those are some of the most difficult situations. And I'm really, really glad that we've had a situation now where it's not just one or two stories have come out recently in Ireland, but it's dozens and dozens and dozens along those lines. And the fact that we now have sort of a community of people who publicly share their stories, who are supporting each other, is a real positive that has come out of, the difficult situation of having to fight for your rights. But it's not acceptable for the establishment, the political establishment or the media establishment, to use one person's story to demonise the rest of us. I needed an abortion because I had sex, and while I would like to be a parent in the future, I was not ready to be a parent at that time. The reality is, I wasn't fully able to make a free choice because I was unemployed. This was, at the height of the economic crisis, austerity being implemented very severely in Ireland. I wasn't working. I was living at my mum's house. I wasn't in a position to become a parent. But I didn't even get to think about that because of all of these difficulties. And at the same time, I wasn't emotionally ready. I wasn't mature enough, I think, to become a parent. And having had that experience and having talked about it to a lot of different people, including a lot of pro-life, anti-abortion people, and I would categorise, and I have met a lot of different people on that side of the debate, in the, I'd say, hundreds of stalls. We call them stalls in Ireland. I think Americans might call it tabling, or I don't know, like on-street campaigning. I have met a lot of people who are against abortion, not one of them, when I told them that in fact I had an abortion, and it would often be because they said something that was not true, and I was like, actually that's not the case, and they'd say, well, how do you know? And I'm like, well, I had an abortion last year, or whatever. Not one of them said, oh, you should go to prison, you're a murderer. In fact, oh, I'm quite taken aback in almost all circumstances. Now, there are people who will shout at you that you're a murderer, but they in fact are usually shouting before they know you've had an abortion or anything. That's where they're at. But they're a tiny, tiny fraction, or they certainly turned out to be in Ireland in the polls, and in the vote. They just happen to be shouting louder. But the bigger category of people who would have said things that were not true about abortion, and I would have answered back with, in fact, that's not the case, you know, this is the situation, and here's my personal experience, aren't in the anti-choice, pro-life category. They're in the not fully sure category, and particularly in Ireland, where we have, you know, the majority of public schools are run by the church, specifically the Catholic Church. Sex education is spotty at best and sometimes completely absent, and people will often have watched pro-life propaganda in school in place of having any sex ed. People have all kinds of questions, and people don't know about this kind of thing. So often when people would ask questions that on the face of it sound extremely judgmental, when I would answer them, it would all change for them, and it would become clear, actually, it's not this sort of out of context, moral black and white debate. It's not this judgment from afar on hard and fast. It's actually messy and complicated, and I think most people, even if they have heard that pro-life propaganda, even if they have, you know, certain things said to them as they were growing up about abortion, that basic instinct to be compassionate when someone is in a crisis is definitely something that I've experienced again and again and again and again. And one of my organisation, Rose's strategies in the referendum campaign was to highlight that all crisis pregnancies are a crisis. It's not just a crisis if you were hurt enough in whatever way people might think is enough. Very, very, very often we would hear people say, well, I understand if you were raped, but, and then something else. And actually, they're being compassionate at the beginning. They understand that if there's a real crisis, you need a choice. So one thing that we wanted to do was say, actually, it's all a real crisis. You know, it written down on paper, I don't have enough money, might not seem emotionally the same as surviving assault. But in fact, people's lives are difficult, and I don't have enough money is a huge crisis, an enormous burden for someone to bring up a child. And we currently have, you know, a massive housing crisis and all kinds of things that we were able to broaden to other issues and say, actually, it's not just about abortion, it's about real choice. And, you know, as a socialist feminist and coming from a left perspective, our organisation is very clear. That means the choice to have a child as well as the choice to have an abortion. The two are inextricably linked, so much so that like the majority of people who travel and give Irish addresses in British abortion clinics already have a child and things like that. They're one and the same, mothers and people who have abortions. So we were able to highlight a lot of that, and while I think the majority of the referendum campaign, in reality, was the easiest part of the campaign. It was getting them to hold the referendum that was very, very difficult. And we were mobilising the support that we had. We did convince people. We convinced people on the basis of conversations, and we convinced people because we mobilised our base, and our base, which would include 15-year-old girls, said to their parents, their uncles, their friends, go out and vote for me. Vote yes, because someone you know will lead to choice someday. And I just want to mention very quickly, I'm really glad to have heard Kevin and the information about the CN Legal team. Women on Web's founder, Dr. Rebecca Gompertz, who is an incredible advocate for social justice, has established a new organisation specifically to assist people in the US, and it's called aidaccess.org. They went live in April and have helped a few hundred people so far, and just kind of went public a couple of days ago. And they are not not taking donations at this time, which many people have offered, but are asking that people would spread that information. Because even while we have clinics now, they're just not an option for a huge layer of people, and people should know about their options. And obviously, in the future, if more clinics are shut down, etc., we need to ensure that people get that access. Women on Web have never said, we just want to, not just, but we want to assist people to access abortion, and we'll sort of accept that it's illegal. Women on Web works hand to hand with Women on Waves who fight for abortion rights and who we've worked with in Ireland, and I think we're part of, not necessarily the referendum being one, but specifically the fact that the legislation that Irish politicians, some of whom signed pro-life election pledges in the last couple of years, are now advocating is that you'll be able to go to your local GP and get abortion pills up to 9 weeks for free. With no requirements to justify your reasons or anything like that. Now, the 3-day waiting period that they snuck in there that we're going to fight, but huge change is possible, and sometimes people are spurred into action on the basis of fighting for something whose time came, in fact, 40 years ago. But sometimes people are spurred into action because they're under attack, and I certainly was very inspired by, we had a Women's March in Dublin after Trump's election. Just because things are very, very difficult doesn't mean they won't turn around, and I think the fact that things are so difficult and there's quite a clear enemy can in fact provoke people to become active, and I hope that we'll be able to work together internationally to fight on all of these issues.